Welcome back to Yang Daily. I'll be your host, Alex Cheney, bringing you all the Yang news you need to live your life right. Quick one today. Just a heads up, I'll be off tomorrow. Got some chores to take care of, and I'll be recording an episode on another podcast as well. More on that later. Shout out to our Tier 3 patrons, Peter Park, Shay Meehan, and Nathan Stankowski, as well as all our other patrons. You keep us all informed and engaged. If anyone out there wants to join these advocates of humanity first and independent journalism, head on over to patreon.com/YangDaily. It would only take a couple of bucks a month from each listener to keep this podcast and community going and growing into the future. On warnings from the FBI of armed demonstrations by right-wing militias and MAGA at state capitals, National Guard were called in, barriers erected, and law enforcement prepared for full-scale riots. The planned demonstrations petered out today without any reported violence and fairly low turnout. We'll continue to monitor leading into the inauguration. A Twitter user, Literary Mouse, put together a helpful thread laying out how the insurrection at the Capitol developed neither completely spontaneously nor as a completely organized conspiracy. It was many groups, both organized and not, coming together in a chaotic mess. Some small groups came to the rally with completely drawn-out plans to storm the Capitol and execute congresspeople. Most came with no plans at all, and everything in between, which is why you see bare-chested moose men next to paramilitary terrorists. It also lays out the police response, making very clear how strong the cops' orders were to not take forceful action against MAGA, which we now know was largely directed from the Trump administration. I pulled out the most pertinent tweets into a shorter thread that you can check out below. In another contrast from the riots during BLM protests, the Capitol riot and the sort of harassment that Lindsey Graham experienced at the airport have taken a dynamic for GOP politicians to another extreme. Before, Republicans were afraid of MAGA at the polls. Now, they're afraid for their lives. Some congresspeople on the left and some of the 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Trump are hiring personal protection and buying body armor. For the first time in a very long time, our elected officials in America fear assassination. Credit to Trump and his followers. If you needed any further evidence that we are being dragged into an authoritarian state, this would be it. The Lincoln Project podcast just put up a really great episode with Ann Applebaum on authoritarianism versus democracy that we don't have the time to break down right now, but that I highly recommend, link below. I also recommend the Moving Forward podcast's most recent episode, where Corey came back to discuss the Capitol attack with Rio, and they managed to make it hilarious, which is impressive. They also made the very important points that the entire line of succession was in the Capitol when it was attacked, making it arguably the most severe act of sedition since the Civil War, and that it was a huge national security breach as a mob, which could have had anyone in it, had access to a lot of confidential information. QAnon conspiracy theorist and somehow U.S. Representative Marjorie Greene has been temporarily suspended from Twitter for continuing to spread lies about the election. It's only a 12-hour ban, but that's assuming she can avoid sedition for any length of time, which is not likely. In a related phenomenon, part of America's political woes are that voters are ignorant of what they're voting for. Polls from Data for Progress show that voters are mistaken about what their party supports and opposes, partly because the party is lying to them, partly because some of the positions are so bad that voters can't believe their party would support it, and ultimately because voters lack the time or interest to check voting records. For instance, GOP voters don't believe that their party supports dumping pollutants into streams and rivers, despite that their party voted almost unanimously in favor of removing regulations preventing exactly that. It's a position so toxic, pun intended, that many voters simply cannot believe their representatives would support it, so they assume that they don't, and are highly resistant when confronted with the facts. Most vote Republican for stuff like gun rights, abortion, theocracy, that sort of thing. They don't know about this minutia, and they just hear the propaganda, and it happens to varying degrees with both parties. This is both why having an ignorant voting population is bad for democracy, and why standards of truth must be established both in media and for politicians. Bakersfield is proving to the rest of California and the country that homelessness is not just something we have to accept. In conjunction with Built for Zero, the city has eliminated chronic homelessness. Agencies in the Bakersfield area use Built for Zero's by name list, which tracks every homeless individual and records their situation and needs. Built for Zero's strategy lead, Eddie Turner, says, quote, "It's hard for agencies or county governments to think of people experiencing homelessness in the abstract when you're really dealing with them by name. They're not a number on a spreadsheet." End quote. They've also adopted case conferences where nonprofit managers meet weekly to discuss 15 people who need help, which Turner says transformed the speed with which the Bakersfield system was housing people. Homeless residents get housed in 28 days on average in Kern County. Other communities in the Built for Zero network are following the same path. Ideally, everyone will soon have a UBI, which will allow them to afford their own housing easily, but until then, Built for Zero may be a vital approach that we should help spread to cities around the world. Check out their site below. Finally, it appears Mayor Yang now has a convoy of 2 on his bike commute. No, not his son. I don't know New York well enough to tell if it's a cop or not, but it's pretty amusing. Check it out at the link below. And that'll do it for today's Yang Daily. Check out the Lincoln Project and Moving Forward podcast episodes. Bookmark and share the Built for Zero Bakersfield article. Flood Congress with calls, tweets, faxes, and letters using the ResistBot or Income Movement Easy Contacts below. If you need help, consult Humanity Forward, the Income Movement Aid Database, the Mission Asset Fund, United Way, or the H3 podcast thread. And don't forget to Yang Daily.